Welcome back to Ride On. I'm James Gross, and this week I am joined by two very special guests, but one guest in particular also was the host of Micromobility podcast for a very long time. And so I'm very excited to welcome Oliver Bruce back to the podcast. How are you doing, Oliver?
I'm great. I'm really excited for this. I have a little bit more space in my calendar, and I thought, that I'd love to just come back and do these every so often. And James let me know that we were going to be interviewing Toussaint today, and I just thought, keen to come back and drop in every so often and say hi, keep my finger on the pulse of what's going on in the world of micromobility.
I love it. Okay, so we've gotten Oliver out of retirement, which is a big deal. We're very excited. And it sounds like we got Oliver out of retirement because of our guests. So I'd like to introduce Toussaint Wattinne, the CEO and co-founder of Upway, to the show. Upway very recently just announced a fundraising, a Series B fundraising of a little over $30 million, which is a big deal in our market right now when a lot of people aren't fundraising. So Toussaint, welcome to the show.
Hi, James. Hi, Oliver. Good to meet you and to spend time together.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. I think, again, just for everyone's education on Upway, I think Oliver and I have been following you for some time. I think we've been very interested at Micromobility in the secondary market, how it was going to evolve, how it would show up, what would it look like. And I think Upway is probably the best example to date of a true marketplace for both buyers on the secondary end as well as sellers on the secondary end. And so for everyone at home that doesn't know, of course, Upway is an amazing company started in 2019 by Toussaint and his co-founder, headquartered in Paris, France, but now in quite a few markets, including Belgium, Germany, the Netherlands, and of course here in the United States. Most notably, of course, Upway is known for refurbishing and certifying a vast array of electric bikes. I think you're up to over 400 brands as far as I knew. And I think your numbers are over 20,000 electric bikes have now been refurbished and certified. So it's a really interesting idea and a very important idea to the overall ecosystem. So let me stop right there, Toussaint. How does that sound? Is getting right or wrong there in introducing your company?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary. You aged us a little bit. We actually got started in 2021, but apart from that, so we just celebrated our 2-year anniversary. We launched in November 2021, so it's been just 2 years since our start. But other than that, the goal has really been since day one to bring back trust in the secondhand market for e-bikes. E-bikes are gaining in popularity super fast, and so it's quite rare to have a piece of equipment, a piece of hardware that's growing so consistently year after year in both Europe and now the US. And what we were seeing is that the secondhand market was super underdeveloped, largely due to a lack of trust. It's an expensive product. It's very technical. There's a motor, a battery that people, don't want to see break in a few weeks after their purchase without anyone to be able to turn to. And so what we wanted to do was really bring back this trust. And the best way to do that was to really buy those used e-bikes, whatever their condition, refurbish them in the best possible state, and then sell them online, which gives you as a consumer choice among the most popular brands in the US, in Europe, at a very competitive price, because on average, we're able to offer up to a 30%, 35% discount compared to retail price, but without sacrificing quality, because the bike has been through a certification by a professional mechanic and comes with a 1-year warranty.
Fantastic. So the reason I find this area so interesting is because it's like we've had billions of dollars of bikes sold, and there's a very developed secondhand market for cars, and yet this was kind of clearly an area. And I do want to give a shout out here to Puneeth Maruva for his work with Ride Flywheel, which is a great newsletter if you're interested in this area. He's been tracking what the secondhand sales markets look like for e-bikes, just using kind of like scraping on Craigslist. And I think that what I would love to hear from you, Toussaint, is like, what are you seeing in terms of what have you found interesting in that e-bike market? Like clearly the trust part hasn't been, you saw an opportunity because there wasn't people able to trust that market. What did you see initially, and then what are you seeing now that you have better certification processes for being able to have people buy secondhand bikes?
Yeah, so there's a lot in there, and I could probably list a long list. But funnily enough, the first thing that we saw and we had an intuition for, but a lot of people challenged, was at the very beginning of Upway. A lot of people told us that we were too early in the market, and that e-bikes were still in infancy, and that this was way too premature. I think in our minds this didn't really add up, because in Europe alone, by the time we launched end of 2021. Over the previous maybe 6 to 7 years, about 20 million e-bikes had been sold, cumulatively in Europe alone. So you're talking about, a number of vehicles in circulation that is already very meaningful, and it wouldn't be a surprise for a couple 100,000 of these owners to be looking for, selling their e-bike, maybe upgrading, maybe changing use case. And so we were quite clear that, it would take us a couple of years already to get to a couple 100,000 units a year. And so it didn't feel too early. But I think the very first thing we saw, and back to your question, was indeed that we are talking about a mass market and a mass adoption, happening and trajectory. And it's already been years in the making, meaning that there is a lot of bike owners who are looking to upgrade, change bikes, and sell for a variety of reasons. And building this trust in that life cycle was very important. And I think the second thing that we saw that was a really positive surprise was just the customer response since day one. From the first month that we launched Upway until today, with now more than 3,000 reviews, we've maintained this 4.8 rating on Trustpilot, which I think is a testament to the fact that when you can bring great quality e-bikes at a fraction of the price of new, but with a warranty and the peace of mind that it's being fully refurbished by a professional, this really builds trust and builds a high degree of confidence in buying secondhand on Upway. So I think the second big learning was indeed just the super strong positive response. Back to your comparison with cars, I think today in Europe and the US, for every one new car sold per year, you have anywhere from 2 to 2.5 used cars changing owners every year. Of course, the market is far more mature, far older, but this gives you an order of magnitude of just how big that secondhand market can be, and how long an e-bike can last if it has multiple owners. What matters is making sure that at the end of its first life, it can actually find a second owner.
Clearly, I'm talking to two people from Uber here, and I think what you have the big challenge of course, the two-sided market. And I remember when I first saw Upway, again, congrats on the success happening as quickly as 2021, launching that late, and seeing the success you had to date. When I first saw it, I felt like, the immediate demand in my head was Upway's trying to get supply, trying to get me to sell my bike to them. I remember seeing the first website, kind of felt like that was a lot of the messaging, and what I was probably maybe most interested in. How have you gone about, of course, gathering both sides of the market? So not only, hey, come to Upway to sell your vehicle, but also come to Upway to buy your vehicle. And what has that been like over the last less than 2 years? But I'm just curious what that journey's been like, and really where what are the biggest challenges with building that two-sided marketplace?
Yeah, totally. So clearly, there's three big muscles in the business and three big components, right? Making sure we source and buy the best possible models, brands, bikes, etc. Second is having the operational capacity to be able to move those vehicles around, inspect and refurbish them in-house, store them, and then sell them and deliver them to the end consumer. And finally, the more consumer marketing side, which is about building the brand and achieving the reach to make more people know effectively about Upway and becoming more and more top of mind in quite a vast category. And so back to your point, it clearly started with the buying side, right? There's no business that we could build without having a decent offering, quite a diverse offering. And the way we've gone about it is really trying to be the best possible partner to as many players and actors in the ecosystem. And so maybe to give you a couple of examples, today we work with more than 1,500 retailers and dealers of e-bikes who use our trade-in software to be able to offer a great service to their customers. What that means is, as a customer, if you own an old Gazelle and want to buy a new, Specialized, you'll come with your bike in the store. You'll get a live quote. Maybe you can get an extra, you can get maybe $1,500 out of it. And that will be used as a voucher to buy your new bike. And so that means that maybe for a $3,000 Specialized, you'll be able to only cash out, only use $1,500 by swapping and exchanging your old bike against the new one. And the way that works for the retailer is that we're the one providing the live quotes. We're collecting the bike at the dealer location, and we're paying them as soon as we've inspected it. So clearly, it's a super free and super easy sales tool and conversion tool for dealers. And another example has been more recently, we've worked with Super 73 and a number of D2C manufacturers in managing their returns. They typically get anywhere from 1 to 3% of their online sales getting returned for a variety of reasons. Those returns require an inspection, require some repairs, replacement of parts, and then being sold online at a price that must differ from the retail price because they're not new anymore. And so this is an operation that most manufacturers do not want to deal with, are not equipped operationally to manage. And so they're really excited to work with a partner that can do this on their behalf. So those are just a couple of the examples that we've used and the couple of approaches that we've used to make sure we can source the best e-bikes in the market from every actor in the ecosystem. Of course, a consumer can come to Upway, get a live quote, get the bike picked up at home. And so that remains an important channel to us. But we're really looking to work with leasing companies, dealers, manufacturers in helping them solve their problems as well with Upway.
Okay, that's fascinating. And I guess on that point, so how much of that is your business? How much of the business is actually not the distributor, the retailer channels, the manufacturer channels versus the Joe the consumer coming in and just trying to get a quote? And it's like just curious how you think about or just the percentage of business that might come from either of those channels.
Yeah, it's varied a lot over time, and it varies by region. So to give you an example, in Europe, which is our most mature market, and where e-bikes have been here the longest, and the adoption of e-bikes started years earlier than in the US, the retailer network that we have is larger, and this trade-in program we have with dealers has grown larger than it has in the US. And so today it can be anywhere from north of a third of our sourcing that can come from dealers in Europe. In the US, the picture is a little different because dealers are typically more recently started selling e-bikes. And so there's fewer people and consumers who are looking to upgrade and have an old e-bike to trade back in. And so what that means is that trading is a slightly smaller portion of our sourcing in the US. On the other hand, there are more D2C manufacturers, for example, that sell direct to consumer. And so for them, their B grades, their returns, sometimes some of their overstock plays a more important role, and our direct to consumer purchases as well. So that mix really varies a lot by region and over time.
Oh, look, one of the things that I found super interesting has been, so clicking around on your site, right? Like some of those D2C brands, for example, like Electric and Red Power Bikes, which are sort of like the two, I guess, the two most prominent bike companies, don't have any listings at the moment. And then you've got Resemuller and Specialized, who obviously are, they're like the higher end bikes, and so there's been like good margins in them. And I'm curious for you if there's a, like, what have you seen in that breakdown between the sort of the high brand or the high cost brands, and then these sort of D2C lower end of the market? Like, what are the dynamics that you're seeing in the market for people trying to sell them, or like where the economics are?
Yes, it's a good question. Overall, what we're seeing is that there really are, let's say, two massive segments that are very popular on Upway. And I think a third segment that exists in the US that definitely doesn't today belong on Upway, and I don't think ever will. The two segments that we see being most popular with us in the US specifically have been that more premium segment of, you mentioned some of these brands, Specialized, Riesenmüller. What you find is people typically have anywhere from a $2,000 to $3,000, maybe $4,000 budget when they approach buying an e-bike. And what Upway enables them to do is to effectively access premium brands at a budget that they otherwise would not have accessed for a new product. And so what that means is that you can afford a $6,000 Riesenmüller if it's actually available for $3,500. And so that's a first big segment we're seeing. And that's the reason why you're seeing us invest so much in building inventory and building availability and offering on these segments, because of how popular those brands are for a much more reasonable budget. On the second big segment that we see is this more entry level segment for people who really want to make sure that they spend as little as possible to get a quality e-bike. And that's where the Aventon, Rad Power bikes, electrics come into play. What you usually see is that those brands have a higher sales velocity, meaning that they will show up on our website. They just happen to stay for even less time available. And typically we have one feature that enables you to get an email update as soon as we bring bikes online and available for sale that match your search criteria. And on those lower priced segments, you will typically see that those alerts trigger very fast sales as soon as bikes are available. The one segment we do not provide on Upway has been the lowest quality, lowest safety segment of e-bikes, typically coming from a number of Asian and China markets, where we just do not see the level of quality and reliability and duration of life that makes sense for our business and frankly for a consumer to own a product over a long time.
Yeah. Because there's one thing that like is super fascinating for me as I spent time looking through your site, which is there are certain brands that just absolutely hold, like they're the Toyotas of the e-bike world. And that's like the Terns, for example. Like Tern bikes seem to really hold their value. You're 4,500 new and you're selling them for 3,500 or 3,000 new, versus the Stromer, which is like a, and I'm a giant fan of the Stromers. I think they're like the most amazing bikes ever. They're totally the Porsches of of this world. They're 4,500 new and they're selling for $2,000, and so it's this. I think you have possibly the best data, I think, out of anybody that I've seen on understanding what the depreciation rates are like for e-bikes. Can you talk through what that's like and what you've learned in that process of building this data?
Yeah, the algorithm going behind evaluating the depreciation of every brand and every model and every bike that goes on our website is probably one of the biggest know-hows that we've developed and that we're continuing to develop every day. And it's probably one of the most important assets of the business today. The way we approach it is very dynamic, and it's really based on sales velocity. So based on all of our traffic, we get millions of sessions and millions of visitors on our different websites globally. We're able to assess at any point in time how much time happens between the moment a bike is available on sale, the traffic that it gets, the attention that it gets, and the time it sells. And so that sales through or sell-through rate or sell-through speed is a first and primary component of evaluating depreciation curves. The second big component is an equivalent metric on the supply side, on the sourcing side. Out of 100 people, whether it's trade-in dealers, consumers going to our website or other sourcing channels, out of 100 people trying to sell us a Stromer, and based on our offering, how many accept our offer and how many accept to sell their bike to us. And so when you tie those informations and data together, you're really able at any point in time to assess with a lot of refinement what is the adequate market price for an e-bike. And so that explains the difference between a Tern today and maybe a Stromer. Now, keep in mind that these assessments we do on an ongoing basis. And every single day, every single week, we will continue to process our most recent data. And so what you tend to see is that some data will be seasonal. The mountain bike season in summer will typically see depreciation curve for mountain bikes specifically go up before it goes back down in winter. Or equally, you will see some brands that have a spike in popularity and then decrease or inflate again. So that depreciation curve is not static, and it might well happen that 6 months from now, Stromer will have an equivalent residual value to Tern, depending on that market balance that we see in real time.
Son, you're trying to do a lot, right? I have to imagine at the board level with your investors, you have some very interesting conversations about ultimately what are we the best at, right? And where should we focus? Because you have over time, you're going to have a very complex algorithm on the value of the vehicle. You're going to have constantly managing the supply of e-bikes, which there's a lot of, today, there's horror stories about oversupply in the market, right? Like with bike manufacturers. And then of course, how do we drive demand? How do we get demand? As part of that, so, I knew I was going to interview you at some point. So I was actually doing my homework on Upway, and back in September, I put 2 bikes. I went through the assessment on 2 vehicles. I had a Rad Runner Plus, and I had a Rad Rover 5. And the first critique I'd have, and this is not fair that I didn't give you a chance to tell you I was going to do this or anything, but one of the things that was immediately a little off-putting was the idea that I did not get an instant quote. So I did this on Sunday. Now it was Labor Day weekend, I remember. But I did it on Sunday. I didn't get a quote till Tuesday. And to give you a sense, the market in the US where I live, I can sell it almost instantly. I can sell those vehicles almost instantly on OfferUp. Here is very popular service, Craigslist as well. But I can, and so what I did in lieu of not getting an instant quote was just went to OfferUp, searched the vehicles, saw a relatively clean sale price based on other demand, could sell it within 10 minutes, right? Roughly, like literally, 20 responses immediately. And then when on Tuesday came, so it was like September 5th, I have it here, the email. I did get the quote back from you guys, and it was almost exactly right, like what I ended up selling those bikes for. So it's $674 for the Rad Runner Plus and $324 for the Rad Rover 5. Yeah, that's correct. And so in lieu of like me saying, you guys are doing a lot, you got to do a lot well, but also in the world of like, hey, I can kind of go to another marketplace, I can kind of get an instant quote with like a little bit of research. How do you deal with that? And has that changed since Endeavor? Is it now instant? Because it wasn't instant for me. Because that would have made a big difference. I might have actually gone with you if I did get that instant quote and, the immediate satisfaction.
Yeah, so it's a really good question. And I think part of what you're saying is that is absolutely right, which is that we try to do a lot. And in this case, we are aiming to build the best possible experience to sell an e-bike to Upway. And so that experience is, I think, stellar or very high quality for dealers through the trade-in program, for a number of retailers, even selling overstock, for manufacturers selling returns, and to some extent for consumers selling us their e-bike directly. I guess one question that I have for you is, how did the actual transaction then happen in terms of, how did the bike get collected or delivered to the new buyer, and how was the amount, cashed in for you?
Yeah, so it was people coming to my house and giving me and Venmoing me the money, in both cases. And I've probably sold 15 e-bikes, so it's fairly, I'm used to it. It's very common. But again, I'm clearly maybe that's a weird thing to do. Although I don't know. I mean, Craigslist is so big in the US and in other marketplaces as well. It's a fairly convenient. It is a fairly convenient model. So yeah, I'm just. But is that what I think I might be hearing a little bit from you though? Is like it's not that market is maybe not as important to you, the consumer market of like the instant quote and the instant sell versus what you can do through your retail channels. Like, is that fair to say, or do you want to actually capture that end consumer selling motion as well?
At the end of the day, like every seller, whether it's a business or a consumer, should have a stellar experience selling on Upway. So it's definitely a goal to get there. To give you a sense, one of the key limitations to get a live offer has been the accuracy of the retail price and the accuracy of the catalog to make sure that we're pricing our residual value of the accurate public price of that bike. And what that means is that every week and every month, we're adding new brands and new historical catalogs to our database. And as we do that, there are more and more brands for which we're able to provide a live offer. So there is a higher chance today that you would get a live offer than 3 months ago. And that will continue to grow as we add more and more history and add more and more brands catalogs to our database. So yeah, that's definitely an experience we're looking to build, and we've started building out for a number of brands in particular.
Can I ask, like, did you have were you able to buy data sets of secondhand, like the secondhand values of bikes, so that you could input them, or do you have to generate your entire data set in a proprietary way?
Yeah, it's been an important question we try to solve. At the end of the day, we want to be incredibly accurate in the data that we use in two ways. One is in the specs that we provide end consumers with when selling an e-bike, and the second is in the retail price that we use. And what we found is that at least to date, we've had to build this ourselves to have enough confidence in both of these data sets and the accuracy of these data sets. It doesn't mean we're ruling out purchasing external data sets, but having built the muscle of building that in-house has really stretched our ability to get to the next level in terms of level of accuracy.
Do you guys know the story of Kelly Blue Book, by the way?
No.
Yeah. So it's like you're like his name was Les Kelly in the early 20th century. he was a used car dealer. And he started to call around to the other car dealers in SoCal, like, oh, I have this, because they would get used cars. And so he started to build a list of like what used cars sold for at what price, and all the other dealers would give him the information because they would share it. And then he realized like, oh, I shouldn't be a used car dealer. I should sell this database. And so he flipped it. And, that's the story of Kelly Blue Book. It was like, oh, the value is actually in the data set of what these things should cost, and everyone will license this from me. I shouldn't actually sell them. I shouldn't actually sell vehicles. So I would go there with you, Toussaint. Like, where's the value at the end of the day? Is it with all these transactions, or is it the data set?
I think it's a mix of both. The reality is that we provide a pretty compelling experience for both consumers buying an e-bike, from the best brands at a cheap price with great quality, for the sellers who have a seamless experience going through that transaction, but also for, in terms of the quality of the data that we're able to use in order to inform and hopefully shape to some extent that secondhand market price. To me, it is important that we understand that in a very granular way what that market price is for each brand, for each use case, for each model. I actually think having a liquid market for bikes that are adequately priced actually probably helps strengthen the overall category, because you're more confident buying new. If you have high confidence, you will be able to sell used after 2, 3, 4 years at a reasonable price, and those prices have historically been reasonably constant, and there is some sort of source of truth. So there's definitely value in the data itself. Having said that, our goal has always been to have the maximum impact at the maximum scale. And I really truly feel like today, when I see the kind of customer feedback we get by selling those refurbished e-bikes and certified e-bikes, I truly feel like we're probably having more impact by combining both know-hows rather than focusing on purely the data side.
Totally. I mean, I also think there's an element of this where all of this stuff will end up being, there will be open source standards that will emerge, right? So like I think about, for example, cars that are imported from Japan into New Zealand, where I live. There is a standardized test for how cars get ranked. It's like C grade, B grade, A, like AAA, and you can know when you're buying a car that that's a sort of standardized test that they've built a test which allows anybody to be able to go and participate in that, and so you can know with some level of relative accuracy about what that's going to look like. And then obviously there's all the other stuff that sits after that about so it's this year and it's done this many kilometers and in this band, and so therefore it'll be priced like this, which is the Kelly Blue Book data as well, right? Which comes down to pricing information, and then you can combine all of those variables together. And we don't really have that at the moment. Like if someone turns up with a bike and it's got a whole bunch of scratches on it, but it's got like really low mileage, like how do you calculate that against each other? Actually, I want to go here with you, Toussaint, which is, Horace, did you and I, when we started doing this podcast, like our thesis around micromobility was that these are vehicles that are really computers on wheels, right? And like they are dumb. The reality is like most e-bikes, even today, are still relatively dumb. They might measure mileage. I'd be curious for you about one, like how reliable is the mileage figure on those bikes? Can that be hacked? Or have you seen it? And is that something you worry about? And then two is, what do you see that's coming down the pipe from Bosch or any of these other kind of component manufacturers that you think would be helpful for you in your process of selling the bike as secondhand?
So that's an excellent question. I think first, what we've seen is that the mileage data and generally the data that you can extract from the motor controller and overall electronics has been incredibly reliable. It's actually been incredibly rare to see, work done to change those data points, and that work not having had somewhat an impact on the electronics that we would find out about and would prevent the purchase in the first place. So what we've seen to date is that it's been very reliable. And by the way, one of the reasons why it's so reliable as well, or one of the ways we can check that, is we can perform pretty advanced, for example, capacity tests on the batteries that we purchase, which help confirm the data that you find in the motor, as an example. So there's a number of ways we can triangulate that information, but generally speaking, we've seen a high level of reliability, especially from the most tenured, reliable brands in the market, whether it's Shimano, Bosch, Bafang. Clearly you see that those mass market brands have done the homework in building reliable tech from that standpoint. I think the second thing that's interesting about your call for computers on wheels and for those bikes becoming smart, I think that's definitely the trajectory that we're on and the direction that we're taking. However, some brands tried to move too fast, and it reminded us that what matters the most remains reliability. Meaning, if the technology, the embarked technology, the software can prevent in 10% of cases simply turning on your bike and going, that's a red flag. Similarly, like if you had a car that had amazing embarked technology, but every other day would not, turn on and would not, get out of the parking lot, that would be a no-go, and that brand would have no future. And so I think my sense is that that smart bike and smart technology embarked on bikes probably went a little too fast from a couple of manufacturers and failed to maintain the reliability level that the Boschs of the world have gotten us used to. And so my third view is I definitely see, Bosch in particular probably leading the charge, but a number of other brands also building towards more embarked technology. And clearly, whether it takes the form of anti-theft technology, whether it takes the form of informing you about your typical consumption habits and how you can save battery capacity by making adjustments. There's a number of ways that they're getting smart about it. But what I find reassuring is that rather than going for the speed of innovation, they're trying to maintain reliability at all costs while introducing additional features over time.
Yeah, fair enough.
Is there a simple mental model for thinking through like what your e-bike should be worth? Like, so for instance, in the auto market, I know there's there's a leasing model where, if you do a 3-year lease for most new cars, I think there's a ratio there where you're basically buying 60% of the car over the 3 years or something like that. For the ability, of course, to lease it, not have to own it. There's some intangibles that come with that. But I'm very curious if you have a very simple model for a consumer to understand. Like if you take your, e-bike 2,000 miles, like how much of the price that, what that does to the potential used price. Like I was trying to think about my e-bikes in the concept of like, I try to get to $1 a mile with it, where, hey, if I bought it for $1,900 and I ride it for 1,900 miles, to me, that's like, okay, that's great. That's like effectively break even. Whatever I sell it for is like a cherry on top, because at $1 a mile, it seems like a great mode of, do you have anything like that for the consumer to understand? And just in general, I think education for the consumer. I think people understand in the car market, hey, when I drive this off the lot, it's going to like degrade a lot. Like the price is going to degrade a lot. Is there anything like that you're planning on doing or have done for consumers to understand how they should think about the value of their e-bike once they drive it off the lot?
Yeah, it's super hard to define a rule of thumb that would set the right expectation simply because there's a lot of variety in there. So you could have anywhere from after, let's say, 3 years and let's say 10K kilometers, or I don't know, 5K miles. You could have anywhere from, residual value that's in the low 20s, low 20%, up to maybe in the high 40s. And that will, largely depend on a number of criteria, and typically that algorithm I was referring to and that data that we use to inform residual value takes into account a lot of different inputs, from mileage to, of course, the age of the bike, to the components of the bike, to the use case and the brand, of course. But similarly, like a Mercedes will typically not depreciate as fast as a, Renault in France. Similarly on e-bikes, there's a lot more brands, and each of them sees a different depreciation curve based on the data that we see. So back to your point, I think the best way today would be to ask for a live quote from Upway, or a not so live quote, but a quote within 24 hours, so that you get your actual residual value, and you could test for multiple ages and multiple mileage if you really needed to. But the short answer is that it varies a lot based on the brand, the use case in question in particular. So really hard to give a simple
That's
answer.
fair. That's totally fair.
I wonder for you, obviously having that data around depreciation, have you had any interest from finance companies like JobRads or any of these other kind of like large finance providers who come to you and say, because and for context, like JobRad is the largest bike leasing service in Germany. They do $1 billion a year in revenue, and it's because there's a fringe benefit tax, effectively that you do not get taxed on it if you provide it as an employer to your employee. And a lot of countries around the world are starting to adopt this. And so you can see, like I know, for example, that there's a real interest in the US. Van Moof that was making huge amounts of progress with a lot of employers before they shut down because they were looking to provide it. But, obviously Van Moof's are now bricked and they're not they're unfortunately the bikes have not done super well. But there are other players out there who would say, from a leasing perspective, well, absolutely, we want to come to you. You have the best data. We want to know which bikes to buy. So our depreciation rates are obviously, we're picking the bikes that are going to depreciate the least, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. So that's an excellent question. We actually, interestingly, this leasing model is the most popular in Germany. That's where the tax scheme that you were describing started the earliest. And so you now have probably over 1 million e-bikes that are in circulation in Germany under a leasing program, benefiting from a tax benefit. So clearly, it's a very mature market there. And what we do in Germany is we actually build forward-looking contracts with leasing company where we can commit on a future purchase price for their e-bikes when they get returned based on the age and the mileage of the bikes. So we are indeed providing that visibility and that residual value in advance that is incredibly beneficial to them financially, because in order to finance their working capital, finance their assets, that's incredibly helpful to have predictable residual value. And it's helpful operationally because they typically don't want to manage the bikes. They want to, at the end of the lease, have someone else collect it and just get the money for it. So we're building that, and we've done a number of these contracts, and we're building more. And I look forward to seeing more of those leasing schemes emerge in the rest of Europe and the US. And I think we can be a tremendous partner. And so, if anyone is opening or launching such a leasing program, they should totally get in touch, because in order to get the financing that they need to fund and finance those assets, having that predictable residual value that we can offer might be a strength and might unlock that funding.
Let's talk about the macro real quickly. So, we mentioned a little bit earlier, but talked a lot at Macroeconomic America in October as well. It seems like at the macro level, a lot of companies are suffering. Their sales are down. Giant reported recently sales down. Shimano reported sales down a lot. Even folks like Mips out of Stockholm reported a big slowdown in helmet sales. What are you seeing in the secondary market? Clearly, you just raised a lot of money, which is great. But are you seeing a similar slowdown in the secondary market to so many of the, I call them maybe more traditional players? For instance, we know electric sales are up and things like that. But I'd be curious what you've seen in the used market. And clearly, in many ways, pretty amazing. It seems like you launched your company sort of right at the peak of demand, late 21. You've probably had to ride down some slower demand in new vehicle sales. But yeah, curious, what does the macro look like in the secondary market, and have you seen slowdown pick up? Just curious where you see it.
Yeah, 2023 has been a bit of a tough year, I think, for the category and the bike industry overall. But there's a lot to unpack behind that probably explains our success despite this macro trend. I think the first thing is that typically occurred for the entire bike industry taken as a whole, where bio bikes or muscular bikes, like non-electric bikes, still play an important role. And so when you look at the underlying data, you tend to see that the e-bike category has continued to grow or at least flatten, when the non-electric bike category faced a steeper decline. And so that's what happened with a number of retailers. That's what happened with a number of manufacturers. And so as we focus exclusively on e-bikes, which is, in our opinion, the mass market vehicle that will reach the highest levels of penetration, ownership, and transactions, we haven't faced as much of that temporary decline. The second thing that has clearly happened is there's of course been this boom during COVID. There's a bit of an exhale post this COVID peak, but you're still looking at an underlying trend that, from a CAGR standpoint, from an averaged annual revenue growth, is still very meaningful. And so typically 2023 is expected to surpass 2020, so the pre-COVID years, by the order of magnitude that you would have expected in the absence of a COVID peak and in the with a simple and standard growth rate. So the reality of that exhale means that those facing difficulties, benefited from the peak of COVID at full capacity and are now seeing this exhale but still performing at good levels. What makes their lives hard is if they overproduced and end up with a lot of overstock, which takes cash, takes operational space, and includes writing a loss if you need to maintain those assets for long or discount them to sell. But I think it's a temporary challenge that some companies, if they're most fragile, will probably not survive, unfortunately. But a lot of companies will actually go through this period and then get back stronger, starting 2024, maybe 2025 at the latest. So that's the second big thing.
Sorry, on the used side for you and your inventory, have you seen a slowdown on used demand?
And then there's the secondhand market where unfortunately we don't have a lot of secondhand data at a macro level, and we're trying really hard to find more of that data or to actually extract it. Of course, let's stay super humble. We've sold 20,000 bikes in 2 years. It's both a meaningful operational lift and pace, but it's still a fraction of the market. Europe alone sold 5.5 million bikes last year, so new e-bikes. So clearly the secondhand market, even if it's a fraction of that, probably involved a couple 100,000 transactions. So we're still a small fraction of that. And so in that context, to me, it's quite natural that we would continue to grow at a rapid pace until we reached a scale and a portion of secondhand transactions that start representing the secondhand market and its ups and downs. But to your question, what happened in the secondhand market as a result of this overstock period was a downward pressure on prices. I don't think it challenged much the volume of transactions, but it definitely, lowered the average selling price. And we saw that in our data over the last couple of months. Over the last 6 months, we've seen a reduction in that average selling price, which we expect to take a few more months before it climbs back up.
I want to ask as well. So obviously you specifically focus on e-bikes as the very, obviously very specifically in the e-bike category. Do you have have you thought about doing either scooters, so the sort of like the kick scooters, the Lime or Segway equivalents, or going into like the e-mopeds and or e-motorbike space as well? Just given that, obviously like not directly related, but they're peripheral markets. It kind of makes sense that some people will end up moving and shifting to all of those. And it kind of, our thesis again about micromobility is that people have e-bikes that they do a particular job, but they're good for certain trips. And then there's obviously vehicles on either side, and people will own multiple things.
Yeah, totally. So we've chosen to focus specifically on e-bikes, at least for the time being, for a couple of reasons. The first is ultimately our goal is really to make that light electric mobility space or micro-mobility, those micro-mobility vehicles more accessible for more people, basically to help accelerate the adoption trend that we're seeing. And so, when focusing on, where can we have the most impact? What we found was where there was the most volume and where our offering would bring the most value to consumers was on the e-bike category. Typically compared to mopeds, the orders of magnitude are multiple fold. It's clearly like there's far more e-bikes in circulation, at least in Europe and the US, compared to electric mopeds. And so until the e-moped category starts reaching a bigger scale, we see that our focus is best deployed on e-bikes. When it comes to electric scooters, what we found most challenging there has been just how reliable the products are, how long a lifetime they can have, and how much value we can bring by refurbishing them to the highest standards and then selling them again at a cheaper price than new, but for, again, under warranty and for a meaningful amount of time. And we haven't quite found that sweet spot yet for electric scooters. I'm looking forward to seeing, what those products and the next product generations will look like. And there might well be a time when we offer not only electric bikes, but electric scooters, electric mopeds, depending on those couple of criteria.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I want to ask just one final question here because I'm conscious of time as well. Is around the economics of being able to purchase, like what do the margins look like for you in terms of for your business model? So on average, I don't know if you share this, but like what's the average markup between what you manage to purchase a bike for and then what you're able to sell it for? Taking into account obviously that there's a fair amount of work that has to go in for a bike.
Yeah, so we don't share the specifics, but clearly there's been a ton of work, right, happening on our unit economics overall. because we simply cannot build a lasting and long-term business if we don't make these economics work. What's been super interesting for us and quite impactful even in our ability to raise this Series B is that very quickly we were able to price our service and extract the margins necessary to scale our operations and fund our operations. Said differently, our operating unit economics, so the money that is left after you've purchased the bike, given it spare parts, put a mechanics on it to work on, put logistics behind it, and all the packaging around it for delivery, etc., etc. Those operating unit economics are positive. So we're making money for every bike that we sell. And so our investment is really going into two main things. The first is consumer marketing to build that, consumer awareness. A very simple rule of thumb is that the majority of consumers that will buy a bike from Upway next year have probably never heard of Upway yet. And so we really need to get the word out there and get our name out there. And the second big area is this international expansion. It obviously costs money when we open new warehouses, when we start a new country. We've moved really fast. Within our first year, we opened 4 countries in Europe. And within our second year, we opened the US, which is a beast of a market. I expect the US to be our biggest market in just a few years. So clearly those were really meaningful feats. And so we really wanted to make sure that we were equipped to do that. And that's the reason behind our fundraising. But that fundraising would not have been possible had our unit economics not been positive on an operating basis.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
What a new world, Oliver, unit economics had, or positive.
Yeah, I know. Positive unit. What are these?
Goodness gracious. Okay, playing a different game. So you mentioned it there, Toussaint, but let's talk about it real quick. So you've come to the US. Sounds like a very exciting market. More than one entrepreneur out of Europe has told me, gosh, I love the US market because they don't beat up the vehicles that much and they aren't as price sensitive. Have you seen any truth to that in your world, where maybe you could sell for slightly higher, or the vehicles come in? I mean, again, they're basically slightly less used, is what I've heard from entrepreneurs. Like, they're just not as day-to-day ridden as they are in Europe. Have you seen anything like that trending wise, where the US consumer is different than some of your European consumers?
So there's definitely a lot of differences. I think the first thing that was striking was actually the similarities between Europe and the US. And there's two that come to mind. The first is geographically, the demand for electric bikes is very, very spread and distributed. So you see a lot of, from a penetration standpoint, or let's say purchases per 100,000 inhabitants, you see comparable numbers between large cities, where you will see the, city use case, commuting, getting your kids to school on a long tail, etc. But you see a comparable penetration level in the countryside for a different use case, typically trekking bikes for commute and leisure, or mountain bikes to go have fun on the weekends. But clearly you see that the products and electric bikes overall have a high adoption regardless of the geography you live in, which to me is super exciting because it means the potential for changing the way people move around is all the bigger. And the second similarity is that we see the demand or the demographics profile to range from 25-year-old to effectively 55, 60 years old. And so you don't see any skew towards either the younger or the older generations. Within those two age groups, it's quite an equally split demand pattern. And so that to me is, again, quite exciting because, again, it just proves the point that I think there's an electric bike for everyone, pretty much, from the most modern, sleek, recent brands to the more traditional, trekking bike, even a trike on some occasions. So that those were the similarities that we found between Europe and the US. And then in terms of differences, I don't think we've seen yet, in a meaningful way, a difference in how used they are. For sure, the US is a more recent market. So you see fewer bikes that are 5 years old with extensive mileage and with more work to be done. That's for sure, because the market is more recent. But what we tend to see is that there's a similar attention being put on buying a reliable product. We see that the Bosch engines and Bosch motors typically are quite popular because of how reliable they are. There's just a little less education on what it means to have a different torque, what it means to have a certain amount of watt hours in your battery. And so there's a bit more of that guidance that we provide and that curation that we do in helping and guiding consumers buying the right e-bike for them.
Okay, that's really cool. And how about this? What's the most popular mode in the US? Like, what's the most popular bike overall? And what about in France? I'm just curious.
So, I mean, what you see is, generally speaking, the US brands, like the most popular US brands, unsurprisingly become quite popular on Upway. So whether that's Aventon Ride on the more entry level, or the Specialized, the Trek on the higher end, definitely among the most popular. And then there's also a number of European brands that have exported really well. I think Riese and Müller is a good example. Gazelle is a good example. Interestingly, in Europe, German brands are incredibly popular. Cube, Kalkoff, Winora are incredibly popular across Europe. And then each country tends to have a couple of local champions. Moustache in France is very, very popular. Again, Hazele, Gazelle in the Netherlands, very popular. Stromer in Belgium, so it's a Swiss brand, but very popular in Belgium, where speed bikes are a big deal. There's favorable regulations, so speed bikes are very popular. So you see those national patterns with one shared trait, which is usually Bosch-equipped German brands end up being a success everywhere they sell.
Bosch equipped German. Okay, yeah, I'm very curious to see how that will, as you scale in the US, how that will do. I'm always surprised how many people just don't even know, don't frankly seem to care yet. But we'll see if that changes.
What is the Toyota? What is the one that is like you buy it because you know that it's going to depreciate the least?
I think it's frankly too early to say. Again, Bosch-equipped German brands in Europe in particular is a safe bet for that exact reason. And I think that's largely driven by just how reliable the components, the motor, all the electronics are. And also the fact that the brands that are Bosch-equipped are typically also the most tenured and have the most reliable designs and offering and available parts and after sales support and you name it. I think in the US, frankly, it's still up for grabs. I think we're in this world where the market is very fragmented. There's a number of more recent brands emerging and really building their reputation, building their word of mouth with owners having had those bikes for a couple of years. And so we're just in the early innings of defining what are the leading e-bike brands in the US and which ones build the most confidence over the long term. So I wouldn't want to place bets just yet.
Yeah, no, I noticed there are no names being dropped there, so I believe that's an intentional thing. That's okay. Beautiful. Awesome. Well, hey, look, thank you so much for this. I mean, I found this so interesting.
I agree. And, you're doing so much, Toussaint. My final question is what, you got this marketplace, you got this, algorithm to build the right price. What keeps you up at night? You got the money now, you got the money in the bank from a capital perspective, but I'm just curious, what are you most worried about with your business?
I think it won't come as a surprise, and it's probably very similar for a lot of founders. But at the end of the day, what will make or break our business in the long term is just the quality of the team. So at all points in time, it's really about making sure that everywhere where we're growing fast, where we need to build up the team, that we maintain a super high bar and that we've got the culture in place, the people in place to continue really hiring, training, coaching, and basically retaining the best possible people. So as a quick example, I'm spending about half of my time in Germany these days, where we've grown really fast and where we're continuing to build a superb team. I'm looking for a leader to lead the market, a general manager for Germany, and a number of operations managers. This is the thing that's probably where I'm spending the most of my time, and that takes most of my energy or mental energy, is really making sure that when we've got such important hires to make, we maintain the quality of the people that we've had to date, because they are the ones who will bring this business from strength to strength. So that's probably the biggest thing.
You found much talent in the in coming from the world of shared, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, we're starting to see that. We have a few people that joined us from, for example, Jump in particular, that belonged to Uber at some point, and then before it went to Lime. So we do have a few select people that came from those businesses. I expect to see a few more, of course, given the current status of some of these businesses. But we've tended so far to look somewhat outside of the mobility space, not out of intent, but simply because that's where we've seen the most interest to join the business and where we found the people that made the most sense to us. But hopefully we can bring people from the micromobility space and to join the adventure in the months and years to come.
Amazing. Well, let's leave it there, Toussaint. You got a lot to do, and we appreciate you giving us your time. And yeah, for people that of course want to learn more, they can go to upway.co. How much does upway.com cost nowadays?
I don't have a price tag just yet, but if anyone wants to help out in making that happen, I'm happy to have a chat.
Okay, but yeah, upway.co to check out everything going on. Well, you need a bike, you need to sell your bike, you want to get an instant quote, a fantastic service. So Toussaint, thanks again for joining us, and good luck with everything you got going on.
Cheers. Thank you both. Great to chat, and speak soon.
Look forward to it.